So we're here to talk about Terraforming Mars, which is one of my absolute favorite board games.
And mine.
And mine.
Yeah.
The game is incredibly deep, and it takes a long time to get to understand it. And since it's coming out on iOS and Steam soon, we wanted to provide some strategy videos for new players to really sink their teeth into this game.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to go through basically every aspect of this game in great detail. This is meant more for an experienced player. We're not going to teach you how to play the game. We're assuming you know how to play. So, what's this game about, Nate?
So, Terraforming Mars, why do we love it? I mean, for me, it's the theme, number one. The theme is incredible.
I think the mechanics are excellent. There's so many different components to this game. It's not just worker placement or anything like that. It's very deep.
Yeah,
Totally.
It has classic card. It's a card game, so there's drafting component to it, and there's all sorts of combination play, as well as some pretty good tactical onboard play.
Yeah. At its heart, it's an engine builder. So we're going to try to teach you how to build that engine efficiently.
Yeah. What we're not going to do is proclaim that we are the best players of this game anywhere. We do play a lot, and we play a lot of games, so I like to think that we're competent gamers, but I'm sure that as soon as we're done with this video, there will be a gazillion comments in the comment section.
Let us know how we're wrong. That's fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine.
Wouldn't be the first time. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. Nate, how long does a game usually last? How many points are we talking? What are the logistics here?
Yeah, well, so I think the main thing to talk about here, first of all, is just that the game differs greatly depending on the number of players. So in a two-player game, it's just, it's a zero-sum effort. Basically, it's just the two of you building engines. The game is going to last quite a bit longer.
Right.
In a 3 to 5 player game, somewhere in that range, the game tends to end a lot faster because you're all competing to terraform Mars. You're all working on that common goal.
And when you say faster, we mean the number of generations, i.e. the number of rounds. But a 5-player game is obviously going to take longer time-wise than a 2 or 3 player game, right?
Yeah.
And there's also a strategy component to duration as well. If someone's really pushing the board early and trying to do the ground game, and we'll discuss that later, that can also kind of speed up the generations and play the game as well.
Yeah, and to just give you some basic benchmarks in specific terms, I would say in a 3-player game, which is the way we typically play it, I would say our games generally end between 9 and 11 generations. A 2-player game, usually 2 or 3 more generations longer than that, and in a 4 and 5-player game, it could be as fast as 7 generations.
Right.
So it just sort of depends on how quickly you get your engines going, really.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so the next topic we're going to address here is what we call the arc of the game. And in Terraforming Mars, there's kind of a natural progression throughout the game, and we divide that into 3 phases: the early, the middle, and the late. And let's just start off with the early phase of the game. What do you guys typically try to do, and what are you guys thinking?
So, personally, obviously it depends on what cards you got dealt, right? But typically I'm trying to discover an initial strategy, right? Based off the cards I have, what can I make work? Okay, is this going to be a heat strategy? Is this going to be, a ground game strategy? So that's identification is what I'm trying to do initially.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the very basic first thing you do is pick a corporation and select some cards to choose out of your initial 10.
Right.
And I do exactly what you're doing. I try and look for 2-card combos, natural synergies between those first 10 cards and your corporation.
Yep.
If there are some, sort of long-term engine cards, for example, water splitting plant, the one that lets you take iron ore and turn it into oxygen, like things like that, things that are going to be really good in the middle to late game. This is where you want to get those, selected.
Right, but not too late game, right? You don't want to get cards that are going to be, and we'll talk about this later, obviously, but you don't want to get cards that are going to be real late because then you're wasting your money.
That's
right?
true. Yeah, no, that's true.
Right. So, okay, what about the mid game? What do you guys do for mid game?
So in the middle of the game, I'm trying to address milestones. That's an easy way to score some points for the end of the game.
Right.
And if I have some type of engine that's going to get me those milestones, I really try to focus in on that and get those accomplished early. And then also trying to, maybe if I have a couple different strategies going on in terms of engines, I try to narrow it into something that's really going to work to generate income and things at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the middle part of the game is all about focusing in your engine. You can't be good at everything.
Right.
You have to choose something to hang your hat on.
Right.
That's what you're going to stake out in the game. And some of that is dependent on what other people do. And you don't know that in the beginning part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to kind of react to what other people are doing and find your space, find your lane.
Right. I totally agree. Your engine needs to be singing at some point in the middle of this phase, I would say, right?
Yeah.
And one thing not to leave out as well is, you may be focused on your engine, but you also want to be making sure that you're contributing to the actual terraforming, increasing temperature and oxygen levels as well. You can sometimes, and I do this all the time, get caught up in your engine and kind of forget about that part of the game. But that's an easy way to raise your terraform rating and score some points.
Right. Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into the late phase of the game, which is that don't get attached to your engine. At some point, you have to sense that the game is drawing to a close, and you have to convert all of your energy into scoring points. Yeah. And sometimes that means making plays that are bizarre or seem like a waste of resources, or aren't any more directed towards your engine. But that's what you have to do.
Yeah, basically, just focus on points. Points.
Right.
So let's talk about where points come from. You're playing the game, but how do you score the points? So first off is terraforming, right? This game's called Terraforming Mars. That's what you're doing. So what are the 3 categories here?
Yep. So increasing the temperature on Mars, increasing the oxygen level on Mars, and
placing oceans.
Oceans.
So basically terraforming.
Yep.
So every time you raise one of those indices, you also get a victory point. Your terraforming rating goes up 1, and it also increases your economy. Your
right. It's incredibly vital to do that. Obviously, you're increasing your economy, just like you said, and terraforming rating is how you win the game. We're gonna say TR probably from now on.
There are some nuances with the terraforming. So just to take it from a mathematical perspective, there are 19 steps on the heat tracker. There's 14 steps on the oxygen tracker and 9 ocean tiles.
Yep.
So already there are some asymmetries. And so if you have a dedicated heat strategy, you can potentially gain a lot more points on that than you can with oxygen and ocean placement.
That's right.
Yep. And there are some individual cards, some specific ones that will also work to increase your terraform rating directly, but there's only a few of those.
So yeah, each game's probably going to go pretty wildly different based off of the card strategies you're playing. You might see oxygen fill up way quicker, or you might see the oceans are coming down really quickly. So you have to adjust for these kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's actually really important in defending other people from getting a lot of points to try and figure out where are they building their engines, and then to try and get points in that same engine.
Right,
so
don't let them dominate it.
Exactly, right. Because if you just let somebody run away with the heat and get all 19 steps on the heat tracker, you're way behind.
Right.
So if you find that somebody spends a ton of money and time setting up Soletta and other types of things to push their heat production, every bit of heat that you get on the tracker takes points away from that other player.
Right.
Very good point.
And I think in terms of the flow for our games, I feel like temperature is the one that gets met first a lot of the time.
It seems to be the way it goes. Yeah, it's an enticing target, right? Because there's, like you said, there's so many steps in it, and there's so many potential points in it.
Yeah, and if somebody starts maneuvering to get a heat engine going, it generally brings everybody into heat right away to try and make sure that they don't corner the market.
Yeah. Right. That might be based on some of the corps we have as well that work to increase heat or energy levels, because I think there's a lot of them that kind of work in that mode.
Yeah, you certainly get initial strategies like that for sure.
Yeah, and we'll go into more detail on corporation selection, but there is definitely some very powerful corporations in terms of a heat strategy.
Right.
Another way that the oxygen can get going really fast is if somebody commits to a ground game early and is trying to put a lot of plant tiles down.
Right. Yeah.
In our own games, we tend to be a little bit more of engine builders, but we can react to somebody that's trying to play an aggressive ground game.
Yeah.
Another way to score some points would be through the milestones and awards. Like we were touching on earlier, the milestones are things that you meet during while the game is being played, and awards are things that are handed out at the end. With the different boards, there's different milestones and different awards, but that's something to focus on as well throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, so this can't be understated how important the milestones and awards are. You should be focusing on at least one in each category. If you don't, you'll probably be left behind.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how many points you need to win the game, I mean, typically in a three-player game with experienced players, I would say usually between 85 and 95 points, generally more towards the mid-90s is where you want to be in terms of your point total. Um, the milestones and awards are just really cheap ways to get points. So one way to think about it is that let's say that over the course of a 10 generation game, you are on average generating about 35 credits a round. So somewhere in the 350 credits per game or something like that. And you're trying to get 95 points. That means that the value of a point is somewhere between 4 and 5 credits.
Right.
So if you spend 8 credits to get 5 points, you're way undercosted on that. Like that is by far the cheapest points that you can get in the game.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. The cost of the point is the lowest of anything you could do.
Yeah, and it's also a zero-sum component of the game, in that if you get those points, you've also prevented somebody else from getting those points. So it's like a 10-point swing.
Yeah, if you can get more than one in any of the categories, it can't be understated. It's so important.
You're in a ridiculously good position to win then.
And while milestones are all worth the same amount, 8 ME, for awards, there's a difference in cost for those. And if you have an idea in your mind about which one you can successfully get at the end of the game, it's a good idea to fund that early. But on the flip side of that is if you fund too early, somebody can compete with you for that award knowing it's funded.
Right. So you need to be always engaged with your opponent's engine. You need to see what they're doing. If you see someone's going strong heat and that's what you're trying to do, be very careful of funding Thermalist and make sure you can actually do it, for example.
Yeah, and a way that you can pick up, in a really cutthroat game with advanced players, a way that you can pick up a few easy points is to figure out an award that somebody else is going to go for and position yourself to be in second place, knowing that they're going to fund it. So those are just free points for you.
Right. You don't even have to spend the money. Exactly.
Yeah. I would say that on average, our games are decided by less than 5 to 8 points in 90% of the games.
Yeah.
Yep. So when you think about a 10-point swing on a milestone, that often is the difference in a game.
Right.
Yep. Totally agree.
So yeah, the next big category of points is cards. This is a card game. There's a lot of points on these cards. So if you're looking at a card like Lake Marineris or Methane from Titan, for example, all these cards have points on them in the lower right. So, and I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like to go for these kinds of cards late game, sort of. You know, a lot of them are expensive.
Yep.
Difficult to get down without a good engine. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the issues when you first start playing the game is it's hard to tell why some cards cost more than others. But when you just put 2 points on a card, that's worth, coming back to that earlier discussion, if you think each point is worth about 4 to 5 credits, that's sort of worth 10 credits right there. Right. So if you're taking Lake Marineris, for example, which costs 18 credits, and it has 2 points on the card, and you get to place 2 ocean tiles, which raises your TR rating additional 2, you're basically getting a great deal on that. Right. I mean, that's a really good deal for a card.
Yeah, points on cards, it's just super value, right?
Yep, absolutely.
They're hard to get down, but...
Right. I've been finding this more and more that the games where I get totally blown out are the games where I don't have as many cards with those points.
Yeah.
And the games where I'm more competitive, I've recently been paying more attention to the number of points on cards. And it's helpful, really helpful.
Yeah,
totally.
And then, of course, the final component of scoring points in this game is by the ground game. And what we mean by that is placing cities and the plant tiles down on the board.
Right. So this is an interesting strategy, and we've had varying levels of success with this. But basically what you're trying to do is create a group of cities surrounded by plant tiles. That's going to be the main way you're going to score here. So, you need to build your engine around that.
Yeah, and one thing that's important to consider is that a plant tile is worth potentially 3 points. Okay, 1 point just because you get a point for every plant tile.
Right.
A second point because it raises the oxygen level, and a third point for being adjacent to a city.
Right.
So if you see somebody going for the ground game early, one way that you can try and counteract that strategy is to buy up the oxygen very quickly. If you have a way to raise the oxygen level, you're going to reduce their potential points off ground game by a third.
Right.
So when you're talking about countering other people's strategies, that's an effective way to do
Right.
that.
So I would say ground game is pretty high risk, high reward, right? Because in this game, you're going to find that there's a lot of ways to destroy plants, right?
Yep.
That is the number one player interaction in this game, is calling down asteroids, the really fun cards, right?
Yeah.
So if you're able to get this strategy down, you can get a huge amount of points. But and I think in our experience, it's difficult to get that going. Because there's people are going to sabotage you. There's multiple ways to there's multiple special tiles, right, that you can place next to cities to block people. The ground game is difficult to do well.
Yeah, it potentially you can score a lot of points there. It is hard to do well. And the thing about the ground game is that if you're the only person aggressively pushing the terraforming, if you're the person that's doing the ground game, not building an engine and just trying to end the game quickly, and the other people are building engines, you're going to get overtaken. Right. The ground game is most effective when a couple of people are pushing the terraforming rating.
Right.
Because, a ground game is all about ending the game early before people's long game engine strategies can just overwhelm you.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah. I find, just for me personally, that starting the plant engine is really difficult. I feel like there's not a whole lot of cards to really get that going, and there's a lot of cards that will, like you're saying, decrease your plant production early.
Yeah, one thing that can be really helpful if you're going to go into a ground game is Protected Habitats, which is a card that, basically if you play that early, can allow you to sequence your ground game plays a lot more effectively.
Totally.
And one more thing about the ground game, and we'll go into this in a lot more detail, but sequence and play is a lot more important with ground game than it is with other strategies. Because if you think about it, what you really want to do in your ground game is set up like little tripods of cities and then get your plants between them. But it's very easy for other people to buy plants and put them down between you, or to put commercial zone or something like that in there to mess up your structure. And so it can be very powerful with ground game to wait until everybody's done with their turn, they've passed, and then you can take several actions in a row and really put down some infrastructure.
Okay, so let's talk about card management. So you're going to start the game with 10 cards in your hand. This is your opening hand. This is what you're going to base your opening strategy off of. So as you probably know, each card costs 3 ME or 3 credits to buy. And so there's inherent strategy with this. So, Robbie, what do you do with this opening hand?
Yeah, so out of the opening 10 cards, I typically find myself buying anywhere between 4 or 5 cards, usually. And the thing is, those cards cost money, so each one of those is worth 3. And if you buy and keep all 10 cards, that's just money that you've just given away. And with that opening 10 cards, you want to make sure you're buying cards that actually contribute towards your engine or your corporation, and that they will actually help you. It's not a good idea to be buying end game cards out of your opening hand.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of requirements on these cards, and if you buy a card that you're not going to be able to play until several generations later, that is a waste of your money, and it's just going to rot in your hand.
Yeah, I mean, money in the early part of the game is way more valuable than money in the late game. Because in the late game, you have your terraforming rating way up. You're just generating a lot more money per turn. If you've gone for a mineral strategy or a titanium strategy, you're generating that stuff as well. Yeah. But 3 points in the beginning, that could be the difference between being able to play 2 cards in a generation or 2 or 1.
Yep.
Right, so you might find yourself with a lot of good cards in theory, but no way to play them.
Right.
And people are just building engine, your generation after generation, not doing anything. So it's really important to pare down the exact cards you're going to take.
Yeah, I would say a very common mistake is to overbuy cards out of those initial 10. I would say 5 is about the upper limit. There are some corporations that start you off with more cash, and then you can be a little bit more freewheeling with those opening cards. But do you guys feel differently? I mean, do you generally buy more than that?
No, my opening hands are typically 3 to 4 cards.
Yeah, I would agree. 3 to 4.
When we're playing with people who take more than that, they get left in the dust.
Usually that's like noob time.
Yeah, totally.
And just to make sure we clarify what we mean by an endgame card, those are cards that typically have restrictions on them in terms of oxygen level and temperature, like when those can be played. And so typically when I'm starting out with my 10 cards, I just automatically discard any with those requirements, usually.
Right. So obviously, like, don't take a card that is going to require +4 degrees on the heat track. You're never going to play that.
Right.
So
there are a few exceptions. There are a couple cards that are point generators by themselves. For example, pets or fish. These are sorts of cards which, particularly if you're in a competitive game, those can be easily worth 4 to 8 points on their own. And you may want to spend 3 credits to buy one of those, but usually that takes the place of another card that you would want to keep in that opening hand.
Right, that's the thing is, do you want to sit with that card the entire game and wait for it to pay off? Or do you want to take something that might pay off now? That's the question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah, and it has to be a pretty exceptional card to even consider that.
Yep.
And then what if the heat's the last thing and the game ends before you can get any points out of it?
Yeah. So an aspect of card management is the draft. This is a purely optional part of the game. Normally when you get a new hand in a new generation, you're going to get 4 cards and choose from that. But we like to play with the draft. We find it adds a lot to the game, a lot of strategy and a lot of depth. So the way that's going to go is, instead of just picking from the hand of 4 cards, you're going to, you know how a draft works. You're going to pick one card and pass it to the left or right. So, yeah, what are the kinds of things that you guys are looking for when the draft comes around to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say I think that draft is the only way to play this game. I think that there aren't a lot of ways to interact with your opponent in Terraforming Mars. There are a few. There's the plant cards, or the cards that take people's plants away. There's the draft. There's on the board interaction. Sequencing plays and things like that. But the draft is a critical part of being able to react to other people's strategies.
Yeah. A lot of times we'll find ourselves taking cards that we know will be super beneficial to our opponents and just taking those and kind of hate drafting those. And that's one thing I always keep an eye out for.
How much do you guys hate draft?
A little bit. Like, once you've identified someone's strategy, then it gets easier to do that, right? But the better you get at this game, the better you get at hiding that.
Right. So, one thing I think about a lot is like number of players, because if you're playing in a 2-player game, a hate draft is awesome, right? Like it's completely like, oh, I just snake that card and now But in a 3-player game, if I hate draft a card from Robbie, that took time away from me, or perhaps I didn't choose a card that was good for my strategy, which actually helps you.
And that's always the pros and cons of drafting, right? That's what makes the decision so cool is. Right. Oh, do I take this card and mess with you, or do I take this card that could benefit me? So, that's what gives this game so much depth.
That cost-benefit analysis of, does hurting my opponent help me more than just helping myself?
Exactly,
And I think maybe I only hate draft 1 or 2 cards a game at the most.
It's not much. What kinds of cards are the most likely to hate draft?
Well, if you're going for heavy plants, you don't want your opponents to have the asteroids, right?
Right.
Or and
Jovian.
Yeah, exactly. Jovian strategy, and don't worry, we'll get into these strategies in a later video. But the Jupiter cards are another really obvious one.
Yeah, I guess part of managing the draft, another component of that is that if you know that you're entering into a strategy that is easily hated, sometimes it behooves you not to play those cards right away, but to sandbag them for later in the game.
Right, you got to hide it.
Yep. And I think in terms of number of cards we actually draft from each draft during each round, I keep maybe 1 to 2, and sometimes even in the late game I keep none, because I have cards I've been saving for or have the money for to play.
That's a good point. Just like the beginning hand, you don't want to waste your money on cards you're not necessarily going to use. It's the same rules.
Yeah, and another thing, like with beginning players that I see all the time is you have to pay attention to what your opponents are doing. So, for example, if you see that the player to your left is generating 7 energy production per turn, don't pass them, water splitting plant, which allows them to take 3 energy and raise the oxygen level. Like, these are really obvious things, but you can lose sight of that. You have to pay attention to what other people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what I could say is drafting turns this game it turns the interaction way up.
Yeah.
Like it turns into a game where you have to pay attention to your opponents a lot more than you would if you weren't drafting.
Now, there's some subtleties to draft too, which I love. For example, let's say that Robbie is 2 players away from me and has high energy production, and I open up Water Splitting Plant. I can take a card and pass Water Splitting Plant to Nima, knowing that
Right.
he has to take it, right? So if that sort of second level strategy only works if you're playing with good players. If you play with people that don't understand the game, they're not going to pick up on those signals.
Right.
But drafting allows you to communicate
Right, and
a
of
lot of
course,
signals.
that's a risky strategy, right? Because what if I don't take it either?
Right.
Is what you're saying.
Well, that's then just proving that you don't know how to play.
Sure.
Which I've often suspected. Okay, let's switch gears here and talk about tile placement bonuses. For me, this is another area of general strategy that I think is often overlooked and extremely important. So when you place a tile on the board, whether it's a city, an ocean tile, or a plant tile, depending on the square that you put it on, the hex, that hex can reward you with plants or minerals or titanium or potentially drawing cards. Also, you can get money back if you place your tiles next to an ocean. These tile placement bonuses are huge, and I don't know if you guys want to talk about that a little bit, but I find that people underestimate the value of those.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you. I don't know if I would say they're huge. I think they can be really instrumental in giving you a quick boost to your economy and to get a quick boost to your engine. So like, yeah, you want to place an ocean on the tile at Viking site, right? Which gives you 2 cards, which is huge in the early game. At least it can be. So yeah, I'm not so sure I think it's as incredible as you do, but I do assign value to it.
Yeah, and there's certain corporations that would benefit from certain tile placements, like Mining Guild.
Yeah.
By taking that tile placement bonus, you actually increase the production in those, and that can be incredibly useful for that corporation in specific. Man.
Well, I want to come back to that a little bit because I would disagree with you a little bit. Is that if you think about buying a card, every card has a base value worth 3 credits because that's how much it costs to buy a card. And in addition, you can spend an action to sell a card for another credit. So if you draw a card, on its face, it's worth about 4 credits. So let's say that as the first turn of the game, you spend 18 credits to buy an ocean tile and place it on Viking site. It's almost like you got an 8 credit rebate, and you would be very happy to place an ocean tile for 10, right? I mean, I think if you start to think about the actual value of those tile placement bonuses, they're more significant than you might at first, blush realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose so. It really depends on the bonus you got and whether it matters to you enough.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Right. And I think, sometimes with the steel and titanium ones in particular, that could be just what you need in order to buy that 1 extra card that turn. And in a game that's this close, it could be the difference in the end.
Yeah, I mean, the titanium one is a great example where if you place an ocean tile on the Argyle or Planitia, and you get 2 titanium back for that, you just got a 6 credit rebate on that whether it was a card that you bought or what. That's 6 credits. I mean, that adds up.
Right. That's a good point, especially early game when these placement bonuses are more likely to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of one other thing, too, which is that whenever you think about the cost of a card, you have to add 3 to it. So a lot of times when you're looking at, that's an easy thing to forget, but you might be like, wow, this card's a great deal at 12 credits, but actually it's 15 because you had to buy it.
Yeah, always remember that.
Yeah.
Very good point.
All right, so that concludes our first episode. Let us know what you think in the comments, criticisms, questions, things you'd like to see in the future. The next videos that we are planning on producing include ones on corporations, strategy archetypes, and card analysis. So look for those to be coming out in the future. Again, share, like, subscribe.
Thanks, guys.